Good morning, everybody. My name is Christopher Leffoltz, and this is the Development Group Conversation. It is August 4th, 2022. As always, we have an agenda listed out as part of the work here. There are several things in there and as part of the agenda. One is a pre-prep video. If you're interested in looking at that, please feel free to look at that. We also have group conversation slides as well as key review agenda and slides associated with that. That you can also review. As always, we kind of just jump immediately into questions. So a couple notes for myself. As always, I want to thank everybody for their hard work and development in the past quarter. It's been a really exciting quarter for us and a lot of accomplishments. If I start listing all of them, I will forget somebody. So I'm not going to try to list everybody. They'll highlight a couple in particular. One is we got FIPS attestation. That was a big accomplishment for the team, as well as decomposition to basically scale our overall solution on .com associated with the project. Essentially, what I've heard is, roughly we've fixed our scalability for roughly 2 to 3 years time associated with those parts of the product. That's not to say that we have other scalability which will hold us back sooner than that. That's possible, but this is specifically an area that we knew that was what we were going to need to scale in, and we've done a really good job there. And then Christy's writing a note. Christy, you want to verbalize it real quick?
Yeah, sure. I love that you're starting out with wins on hard work and collaboration. So I wanted to bring one up, which is the pajamas migration work. Everyone has really dug in and made some really amazing progress. We're working on an adoption scanner, so we'll soon be able to see exactly how far along we are in the migration process. But wow, I've just been so impressed with how hard everyone has worked on this. So thank you so much.
Yes, and thanks for everybody's hard work on that one as well. And also on a lot of projects that we haven't talked about, obviously, as well. Cool. And then on a personal note, it's corned beef day at the Leffoltz household. So just FYI, I've been been brining corned beef for the last 9 to 10 days, and I'm excited. So later today, I'll get braised and we'll have some corned beef for dinner. So we're pretty excited about that. And if you're curious to find out how it turned out, next week we have a development Q3 kickoff AMA. Please attend that and ask me, and I'll let you know how it went. And with that, we are going to open it for questions. Shortest group conversation in GitLab history.
Hi, I one didn't have time to write it down. I'm curious if there is, you are envisioning to bring the MR rate as a KPI. It's no longer a KPI for development department. It is still for the engineering division, I think. But I see from the OKRs and from the key review that this is something that gets a lot of your attention. I was considering we put more effort on bringing the KPI in the green, but is this something you really see that we want to keep investing more in the coming months? And does that mean that it will become a KPI again soon? Yeah,
good question. So I think you're kind of asking the question in a way it's somewhat leading, if it were, but I think it's the way that I'm headed anyways. So yes, right now we have changed our KPIs to represent the fact that we're looking at past due, overdue, infra dev, and security issues. Part of that is to provide focus for the team. We've since done really solid job bringing those particular types of past due issues down, but we haven't gotten those quite to zero. So that's one of the things is we were hoping to kind of close that out in this quarter, and that didn't happen. So that's one thing that we'll continue to work on. As an FYI, as part of FedRAMP certification, we actually have to, for security issues, get into more of an SLA rather than SLO solution. So it turns out that we were actually pretty smart in hindsight to actually start this effort 9 months ago, because otherwise we would have been in a much more difficult situation if we had not. So really appreciative of the team working on that, as well as being able to feel like we've done something there. But as those get down, actually burned down towards zero, the intention would be is to focus on efficiency. And that's, while it hasn't turned into a Q3 OKR, it is going to be an area of focus for me personally. And you probably will see that turn back into a KPI either during the quarter or by Q4 associated with that. And it's definitely a top of mind. it's also where, if you look at the key review slides, there's some discussion topics around some pretty strong headwinds associated with that. So we need to be thinking about it in terms of that. And then the third component of that is actually whether we should measure ourselves based on narrow MR rate versus MR rate, which is kind of the view of including also community contributions as well as external contributions from other team members within GitLab into that measurement. The trends are still somewhat consistent between those two graphs right now. But one of the things that we've been focused heavily on is maintainership and actually reviewing. And if we go to the overall or the MR rate, kind of the default MR rate of just the total MRs, that would start accounting for the maintainership and maintainer review time, which our department does the bulk of that work, but we're not really counting it into the narrow MR rate. So that's the other kind of component there. So the exact timing of that and the sequence of that, that's TBD, and that's kind of that's kind of where my thinking is. Does that answer your question, Olivier?
Yeah, totally. Thanks.
I'd add, Olivier, there's a little project going on now to look at another way to measure productivity. So there's the potential we might replace MR rate with a more effective metric down the line. One of the nice things about MR rate is it's very cheap to measure and calculate. Some of the problems with alternatives we're looking at is it's much higher effort, right? But like, what's the gold standard of what we're doing? Is it the unit of work's going into the product? Those are MRs. That's a decent proxy, but we've definitely seen cases where some teams, some sections have had roughly the same MR rate, but some have clearly made more progress on their product roadmap than others for various reasons. And that's maybe the choices we make about which features we prioritize over others. Maybe that's the type of MRs that we're doing. Maybe some people did a ton of MRs, but it was all security issues, right? And didn't actually move the product roadmap forward, right? So I as a metaphor, I think of like the concept of wheel spin, right? Like you're in a car and you're mashing the throttle and you hear the smoke and the noise and the wheels are spinning and your speedometer even tells you you're going speed, but you're not going anywhere, right? Because your wheels are just spinning. So another way to measure that would be like, well, at what rate are we actually maturing the areas of the product that we're measuring? How much business value are we adding over time? We do measure product category maturity. UX does that, but like I said, it's a high effort sort of measurement. So we're looking at like, could we actually find some relatively consumable or palatable way to measure that and measure it over time and demonstrate progress? That would theoretically show the difference between two teams with the same MR rate, but one's actually moving faster than the other. That's kind of like the idea we have, but we'll see how that works out. But Chris, sorry, getting back to MR, I was wondering if you could spend some time kind of outlining, like, I think you hinted at it, but like the way I think of it is like there are positive and negative pressures to MR rate. And just could you kind of let us know like what the negative pressures have been, and then what the positive pressures could be or are, as we think about like why it is the way it is and what we might do with it in the future.
Yeah, so can folks see my screen? Mercy, can you give me a thumbs up if you can see my screen?
Yeah,
just to make sure. Okay, thank you. Yeah, so if a good, part of this was getting this documented. So, one of the things that I spent some time on in the past couple of weeks with team members and kind of think about is different aspects of this. So the things that I've seen between particularly when you look at this overall trend, it's not like looking at the last few months. It's looking at it comparatively year over year, as well as kind of looking at the trends associated with it. So you'll see me focus less specifics on the actual number of drops and more focused on the trends associated with that. And like things that I'm noticing is one is that overall we are definitely taking more PTO as an organization. So that's up. So that's actually a good thing. It's a good thing that people are taking time to spend away with family. We got to kind of recognize that. And kind of the rough impact associated with that is roughly 4% of our trend. And then the growth in new team members. So we have actually, for most departments, we've actually hired an entire department for other departments in GitLab in the last 6 months. So it's pretty tremendous result in regards to like our hiring achievements associated with this department. But that's also been an impact on us in regards to at 300 strong. That means that roughly 1/6 of the organization has less than 6 months of time in the company. And you can think of that as they probably aren't as effective as people who have more than 6 months. So, if you start doing the math associated with that, the rough calculation I came out to is 9%. That's under the assumption that roughly the folks that are under 6 months are working about half effectiveness. And then also, they require a team member to also be involved with them, which is taking a quarter of their time associated with it to basically help them associate with that. So it's kind of like, it's like a double impact associated with that. Is that the right thing to happen? Yes, because we're trying to grow the organization. We're trying to look at the long-term investment associated with that. But that does mean there's short-term impacts associated with that that we didn't have in 2020 because we had a much smaller population associated with that. And then reliability and security back in August of 2021, you see a big dip of productivity based on MR rate. And in part, that's because we did really focus on reliability and security. We took on a bunch of initiatives in that July, August timeframe around that. And that's definitely an impact there associated with that, where we're seeing longer review times as well as other considerations around that. So that's a 14% impact. We did have impact for team members who are based out of Ukraine. We've removed them from the denominator as part of the equation, not because of any other reason than just to kind of account for the fact that they're not going to be as productive within our team, given the impact of what's going on in their part of the world. And then there's a couple unaccounted for ones there as well. Future challenges. Normally we have contribute, and contributes 1 month, and we can take an impact associated with contribute. We kind of just wash off that month from a productivity perspective. But because of these visiting grants, it's going to be really hard to distinguish. It's going to feel like a rolling contribute from a productivity perspective this next quarter. So I'm seeing a potential 10% impact across those quarters, assuming roughly everybody takes anywhere from 3 to 5 days of time associated with that. Again, that's intentional, right? We're taking time away from our productivity. That's intentional. We should be doing that associated with that. And then the last one is SOX 2 compliance. We have a requirement there that's based on that, where you can no longer self-merge. And we don't have a large percentage of this, but we do have 10% roughly of the current MRs in some form or another get self-merged. So we have a program around that to basically start enforcing that. That's going to affect the productivity. So what are we doing about it? Well, a number of things we're looking at. One is making sure we're prioritizing the right things associated with it. Another one is like we're looking for directors to basically talk with their teams about what things we can do more efficiently and effectively associated with that, and it's still driving a MR rate of increase of 1, but that's for any month. So that's not like across the whole quarter. So it's actually a much lower bar than previous quarters as far as what I'm looking to increase. It's basically about 1/3 of the goal that we had in Q2 versus Q3. And then the maintainership working group is looking at how we better increase the load or decrease the load for maintainers, so subsequently you're more effective in reviews associated with that. New hires looking to make sure they can take the iteration training, and then look back at the security and reliability issues and see if there's or if they're associated with that. We have a couple of backlog items. I know it's pretty exhaustive, and I talked very quickly. Apologies for that aspect of it. A lot trying to cover in a very short period of time. Folks may have had some feedback in there.
Christopher, I think Marissa and I are taking notes on the positive pressures. We got looking for directors to find local optimizations, maintainership working group activities, finding them efficiencies, new hires, making sure they're taking iteration training. And then there was a fourth one.
Yeah. The fourth one is both, well, actually there may be two there. One is feature flags. And then the other one is to look back at security and reliability issues of whether there's any way you could potentially do those iteratively. Those are 4 and 5. Whichever order you want to put them in. Right now, feature flag, common feature flags is or degradation flags is a backlog item at this point.
Okay, I would say like the iteration training is one of the things that's proven effective in the past. We should consider everybody or the right folks taking it as was just new hires. I think we could all use a refresher on iteration. So I consider making that a little bit broad than the new folks, but that's definitely worked in the past.
Yeah, and that might be that's definitely a good idea. In fact, actually, it might be even good to refresh the iteration page a little bit. Maybe as a sub goal, get my picture off of there. I don't know if anybody's noticed that, but if you go to the iteration page, my mug is up there up front. So replace the video with somebody else talking about iteration training because it's a couple of years old. Probably needs to be refreshed as well.
Christopher, I noticed that you didn't mention we're changing which projects are in the product. There's some work that was being done outside of what was being calculated. So those are some changes that might affect the MRO too.
Yeah, and that's typically what happens is as we add repos, we change the as part of product to include those, and those definitely help to increase it. I think that's what you're talking about, Darva. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, so our MRO rate was undercounted a little bit because of that.
Yeah, yeah. So it typically adjusts things, and we'll have to see if it's big enough to really make a solid adjustment. In most cases, it does adjust things up, and it's like accounting that we definitely want to account for. It doesn't necessarily change the overall trends or actions that we're looking, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't be diligent and continue to do that, because if we really get out of whack with that, then it becomes, the data is no longer valid, right? Right now, I would say it's the data is not necessarily precise all the time, but it's pretty accurate from what I've seen.
Do we know if there is a huge impact from the Workday migration? One of my team members was impacted with not having a job specialty in Workday, so it wasn't tracked correctly.
Good question. So I think it is definitely the case that all managers should go back and review their team assignments and those aspects. And Workday did impact us there, and definitely want to acknowledge and appreciate everybody's patience with that aspect in regards to if you were looking at it for your group or your section. You may not have had accurate data just based on the Workday transition and some of the data challenges there associated with it. That being said, it didn't impact the overall rates because that's just based on the development department assignments. And from what I can tell, those are roughly at the right levels associated with it. We didn't have any challenges with data integrity there.
Is it fair to, just thinking back to some of the negative pressures, you mentioned time off, is it fair to say that Friends and Family Day starting in 2020 was basically an across the board 5% hit?
Yeah, that's the way I look at it is like, you're effectively taking an additional 12 days out of the year associated with it. And what we're seeing is that in 2020, not surprisingly, people weren't taking vacation. So it was really effective way for us to have time off associated with it. But now as we're seeing people take time off, it's basically now they're taking their normal vacations plus that time essentially associated with that. But if we decide as a company that's the right thing to do, then that's a good thing. But then we need to make sure that we're effectively accounting for that in our productivity.
I think like we're not proposing it, but we should put it on the menu.
One of the thought is that we are creating also these synchronization events, and we're a naturally async company. That's kind of our model. So one of the other aspects I see is by adding that additional synchronization time, I want to go back and explore the data a little more closely to see whether that's potentially another impact that we're seeing here. It's just the sheer fact of these are synchronous events, but like we work in an async model for most of our work. This could be more impactful than we actually originally thought.
Okay, cool. Well, yeah, on the friends and family thing, I think like we should generate a menu of options for how to drive this up. And I think we should put that on the menu of options, but say like, we're not recommending this. Like, I don't think anybody feels like that would be the right thing to do, but there can be things on that that are like, this is an unpalatable choice, but if we're anchored on years past of this 10 number, that wasn't a factor then, right? So, put it on the list, but like people should look at what we could do and say like, do we want to pay the price tag on this stuff? But not leave it off and take it for granted, right? Because otherwise it looks like just a dip. So
right, agreed. Yeah, it's more explaining the consequences of our decisions than necessarily saying that we should make different decisions, right, in those situations, and then accounting for it properly.
I think I've got the next one there. So Christopher, is the extra focus on security and reliability that you've called out there and some of the reasoning of the, reduced MR rate, is that going to pivot to, apologies for the poorly worded question here, but a reduced level of extra focus and go back to something that's more normalized over time that will positively impact the MR rate?
Yeah, good question. I think the answer is yes and no. It's not necessarily as crisp as a binary decision. So I think there are two different aspects to this. One is the focus on security and reliability, where the percentage of time that the team is focused on those activities of fixing issues based on our backlog is is definitely going to change, and that'll change back to more kind of what most people would consider feature development associated with that. So our investments will change based on that, and that definitely has a dynamic on MR rate that should trend, because generally features can be broken up more easily than reliability and security issues just by their nature. You can say you can have less functionality in certain situations for a new feature capability versus usually, like if you're trying to scale something, it either scales or doesn't. So you don't really have much choice there. So that's kind of the first thought of it, is that yes, we would expect to see some returns there. What I would say though is that we have also pushed from a cultural perspective, more focus on.
Really from Charlotte?
I'm sorry. Okay.
Sorry, I was not on mute. Sorry.
Okay, no problem. The second half of that though is that we have pushed hard from a cultural perspective of evaluation. We've also implemented new techniques. Like an example is we're walking into production. One way to keep quality up is to not walk into production and impact full situation all at once. It's to walk it in at 5%, 10%, 15%, and then actually watch things dynamically. Well, those things take time associated with our work, and those are things that are very much it's a lot more difficult to get those back, just from an impact perspective, because those are obviously culture shifts and also process shifts that we're not necessarily going to stop doing because we want to limit negative impacts to customers, in particular for .com. What's the analysis breakdown associated with that? I don't have the answer yet on that one.
Okay. Well, I mean, I do now understand your yes to no initial response.
Yeah. Cool. I know as soon as I say that's going to be the shortest GC in history, it always turns into 25 minutes. So we're right about that. And it doesn't look like there's any additional questions. So I'll close out the